In the winter of '82, in a town that prided itself on law and order, I watched a man try to buy a woman's dignity for the price of a train ticket, and the whole damn street just stood there and let it happen. Dry Hollow, Colorado territory. Winter bit harder than bullets that year, the wind screaming like a grieving widow through the frozen pines. The stagecoach rolled in late, its wheels grinding over ice and mud, carrying a woman who had already been exiled twice, once by her mother's Apache people for being half-white, and again by white society for the Apache blood in her veins. Her name was Elara Quinn, and she stepped down onto that platform in a blue gown torn from days of travel, every curve a silent rebellion against the world that had tried to break her. She'd come halfway across the country to meet Nathan Cole, the man who'd sent for her. But the moment his banker's son eyes raked over her, lingering on what didn't fit his refined standards, his lips tightened. "You're not what I expected." In front of the whole damn town, he turned his back, left her standing in the snow like she was nothing. And the crowd? They didn't flinch. Not a hand reached out. That's when a shadow moved from across the street. Broad shoulders under a weathered duster, a limp in his step, and a gunfighter's gaze that had measured death before. Colt Harlow. He wasn't the kind of man who took in strays, but something in her defiance lit a fuse he thought was long dead. Colt Harlow didn't move right away. He stood on the boardwalk across from the station, watching Elara Quinn with the kind of stillness only a seasoned gunfighter could hold, like a hawk measuring the distance to its prey. But she wasn't prey. Not to him. Not ever. The townsfolk had already gone back to their business, the small drama of her rejection fading like dust in the wind. In Dry Hollow, dignity could be stripped in public and no one would blink. That was the unwritten law. Look away, keep your head down, and maybe trouble wouldn't notice you. Colt had lived by that rule for years. Until now. Elara tried to lift her carpet bag, but the strap snapped. Her belongings spilled onto the frozen planks. Stockings, a folded shawl, and a small cedar box painted with faint Apache symbols. She knelt quickly, tucking the box back inside before anyone could see. Colt noticed anyway. The way her fingers lingered on it told him it wasn't just luggage. It was history. That's when Nathan Cole's voice carried from the corner saloon, mocking and sharp. "Guess the stage brought us charity this winter." Laughter erupted from a table of young men, sons of cattle barons who'd never worked a day outside their father's shadow. The sound sliced through the cold harder than the wind. Colt's jaw clenched. He'd buried enough friends to know when a moment mattered. He crossed the street in 3 heavy steps, his limp more pronounced in the cold. The crowd's chatter dimmed. A man like Colt Harlow didn't walk toward trouble unless he intended to end it. "You're blocking the street, miss," he said, voice low but steady. She met his gaze, those eyes the color of storm clouds before lightning, and stood, her chin lifting. "I'm not lost," she replied. "Just left." Without another word, Colt took her bag in one hand and tipped his hat toward the edge of town. "Then let's get you somewhere folks don't measure your worth by the cut of your dress." She hesitated, glancing once toward the saloon, where Nathan sat grinning. Then she stepped toward Colt. That single step, away from humiliation, toward the unknown, would change both their lives. By the time they reached his wagon, the snow had begun to fall, soft and relentless, erasing the tracks behind them. Dry Hollow wouldn't remember this day, but they would. If this part has you gripping your seat, let me know by dropping a 1 in the comments and hitting subscribe. And if you think Colt just signed up for more trouble than he can handle, you're going to want to watch what happens next. The wagon creaked as Colt Harlow guided it out of Dry Hollow, the sound of the iron-rimmed wheels grinding over frozen earth. Snow fell heavier now, each flake catching in Elara's dark hair, melting almost instantly against the warmth of her skin. She sat stiff beside him, the hem of her blue gown frayed from the journey, her carpet bag wedged between her boots like a shield. The air between them wasn't cold. It was tight, humming with the residue of what had just happened. Colt didn't look at her often. A man didn't survive 20 years with a gun on his hip by wearing his thoughts on his face. But out of the corner of his eye, he noticed the way her hands gripped the bag's handle, knuckles pale, as if she expected someone to snatch it from her. He recognized that kind of hold. It was the same way a soldier clung to his last loaded revolver when the night was long and the enemy close. They didn't speak until the trail narrowed between two ridges of black rock. The mule's breath plumed in the cold, the harness chains rattling like spurs in an empty saloon. Elara's voice broke the silence. "You didn't have to do that back there." Colt kept his eyes on the trail. "Sure I did." Her lips pressed into a line. "I don't want trouble following me." He flicked the reins gently, steering the wagon around a fallen branch. "Trouble's already following you, Miss Quinn. Only question is, do you want to face it alone?" That silenced her for a while, but when the clearing opened and his cabin came into view, a squat, weathered structure with a stone chimney and a single barn, she spoke again, softer this time. "It's just, I've had men step in before, and they all left when it cost too much." Colt slowed the mules. "I'm not those men." Inside, the cabin smelled of pine smoke and leather. A rifle leaned against the wall beside the door, its stock worn smooth from years of use. Colt hung his duster on a peg, then set her bag near the stove without asking. "Firewood stacked by the door. You'll need to keep it going if the wind shifts." She looked around. The place was neat, almost bare. No curtains, no decoration, no softness. Just the essentials of a man who had stopped expecting company. She set her shawl on the back of a chair and caught sight of a second coat on a hook near the bed. "You live here alone?" "Not always," he said, pulling off his gloves. His tone didn't invite more questions. That night, they shared a simple meal: beans, potatoes, a strip of cured venison. Colt moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned to feed himself in silence. Elara ate slowly, her mind still in the street outside the station, replaying Nathan's sneer, the laughter of the men in the saloon. Every bite felt like chewing through shame. When she reached for her cup, the sleeve of her dress slid down, revealing a thin leather cord tied around her wrist. Colt noticed it, but said nothing. If he'd looked closer, he would have seen it was braided from horsehair and dyed with red clay, the last gift from her Apache mother before the tribe turned her away. After supper, Colt showed her the cot. "You take the bed, I'll use the chair." "I can sleep by the stove," she said quickly. "Not in this cold," he replied, his voice flat but final. She lay there for hours, the warmth of the wool blanket unable to drive out the chill in her chest. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls, whispering like it was carrying secrets from the ridge. She thought about the men who'd laughed at her, about Nathan's voice dripping with contempt. Each memory was like striking flint, small sparks feeding the anger she'd buried for years. In the chair by the stove, Colt sat awake, cleaning the revolver he'd worn into more gunfights than he could count. He wasn't just thinking about her, he was thinking about the way Nathan had looked at her. That kind of man didn't stop, not when he believed something or someone belonged to him. By morning, the snow had deepened. Tracks led away from the barn, hoof prints, not from his mules. Colt's jaw tightened as he crouched to examine them. They weren't from town stock. Whoever had come in the night had ridden hard, stopping just long enough to circle the property. When he straightened, Elara was standing in the doorway, shawl wrapped tight, her eyes locked on the prints. She didn't ask who it was. She didn't need to. Both of them knew. Trouble had found them faster than either expected. Plus, the prints in the snow didn't vanish with the morning sun. They cut a path straight into Colt Harlow's mind. Wide at the toe, narrow at the heel, they belonged to men who knew how to ride hard and stay light in the saddle. They'd circled the barn, paused near the corral, then pulled away toward the ridge. That wasn't curiosity. That was reconnaissance. Elara stepped down from the porch, her shawl catching the wind. "They're not from town," she said quietly. Colt shook his head. "Not unless Dry Hollow's growing ghosts with horses." His voice was flat, but there was a hard edge under it. They worked the morning in silence. Colt chopped wood, the steady thud of his axe filling the cold air. Elara carried the split logs to the stack, her breath puffing white. Every time she passed him, she caught the scent of pine and gun oil. She didn't ask what he was thinking. She already knew. By midday, the sky was the color of tarnished silver, and the wind had shifted east. That's when they heard it. Hoofbeats, faint at first, then growing, echoing off the ridge. Colt set down the axe and reached for the Winchester propped against the wall of the barn. "Inside," he told her. "I'm not hiding," she replied, but the look he gave her left no room for argument. She went to the door, though she didn't go far, standing just inside the frame, watching. 3 riders emerged from the tree line. The one in front wore a long black coat and a silver-banded hat. Amos Cole's hired gun, Boone Mercer. She recognized him instantly. He'd been there in the saloon when they laughed. His smile was slow and mean. "Morning, Harlow," Boone called, reining in a few yards from the porch. "Shame about your visitor. Amos says she's his, says you're keeping what ain't yours." Colt didn't move. "Amos talks too much," Boone chuckled. "He's willing to let it slide if you hand her over. Save everyone some trouble." The way he said it, casual, like he was discussing a poker debt, made something snap in Elara. She stepped out from the doorway before Colt could stop her. "I'm not his and I never was," she said, her voice carrying in the cold. Boone's gaze slid over her, slow and deliberate. "Pretty thing with fire in her," he drawled. "Fire's good. Burns out quick, though." Colt's voice was a warning growl. "You should leave." But Boone only tilted his head, signaling one of his men. The rider dismounted, stepping toward the porch, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. That was a mistake. Colt's Winchester came up in one smooth motion, the sound of the hammer cocking loud in the stillness. "Touch that gun and you won't ride home," Colt said, his tone as certain as the frost underfoot. The man froze. Boone's smile faltered. "Just a hair. You gonna start a war over a half-breed girl?" Elara's breath caught. The insult hit like a slap, not for the first time in her life, but this time she didn't swallow it down. "Better a half-breed than a coward who hides behind another man's coin," she shot back. The silence after her words was sharper than any blade. Boone's eyes narrowed. "Careful, darlin'." Colt took a single step forward, the Winchester steady. "She's not yours. Neither is this land. Turn around." For a moment, it could have gone either way. Boone's hand twitched near his belt, but then the wind gusted, snapping his coat. Whatever he saw in Colt's eyes made him think twice. He spat into the snow. "This ain't over, Harlow." They rode off slow, the sound of hooves fading into the trees. Colt lowered the rifle but didn't relax. He knew men like Boone. They didn't make threats they didn't intend to keep. Inside, Elara set her hands on the table to steady herself. Her heart was still pounding, not from fear alone, but from the rage that had been building for years. Being claimed, traded, spoken for. It was the same chain in a different form. And if Boone came back, she wouldn't be hiding behind anyone. Colt saw it in her eyes. She wasn't just a woman in need of saving. She was a fight waiting to happen. The snow had barely swallowed the sound of Boone Mercer's retreat before the air around the cabin felt heavier, like the land itself was holding its breath. Colt Harlow set the Winchester back on its rack, but kept his revolver close on the table. He'd seen the look in Boone's eyes, cold calculation wrapped in false retreat. That man wasn't riding away in surrender. He was circling, waiting for a moment when the ground tilted in his favor. Elara moved about the cabin without speaking, her steps deliberate. She wasn't shaking anymore. The confrontation had burned something clean inside her, replacing fear with a steady, simmering fury. She had grown up in 2 worlds, and neither had spared her. But for the first time, she had stood her ground without a tribe at her back or a man in front of her. By nightfall, the wind shifted west, carrying the scent of wood smoke and something sharper, oil, leather, horses. Colt noticed it when he stepped onto the porch to check the sky. Somewhere out there, beyond the tree line, Boone's men were making camp. He'd bet his last bullet on it. They ate in silence, stew thick with potatoes and venison. Colt's eyes kept flicking toward the window. "If Mercer comes back," he said finally, "he won't come to talk." "I figured as much," Elara replied, her voice steady. "So what do? We make it costly." Colt rose, fetched a worn crate from under the bed, and set it on the table. Inside were cartridges, a short-barreled scattergun, and a leather sling holding a heavy-bladed Bowie knife. He slid the knife toward her. "You know how to use one?" Her gaze didn't flinch. I've cut more than meat before. That night, neither slept much. Colt took the chair by the door, revolver on his thigh, listening to the wind scrape branches against the cabin walls. Elara lay on the cot, her hand resting near the knife handle, eyes fixed on the ceiling beams. In the still hours before dawn, she heard it, the muffled crunch of snow, not from wind or animal, but from boots. More than one set. Colt was already standing when she swung her legs to the floor. He held up a hand, signaling her to stay low. The first shot came before the warning could pass his lips. A crack from the tree line, the cabin wall splintering inches from the window. Colt's revolver barked back, the muzzle flash lighting his face in brief, harsh relief. "Back wall," he called, moving toward the door in a crouch. Elara grabbed the scattergun, heart pounding, and slipped to the side of the window. A shadow moved between the pines, another shot, closer this time. She fired once, the blast thundering in the small space, and saw a figure drop into the snow. The fight turned fast. Boone's men fanned out, trying to flank the cabin. Colt pushed the door open just enough to send a shot toward the barn, forcing them to cover. "They'll try to burn us out," he muttered. She didn't hesitate. "Then we move first." It was a gamble, but Colt saw the resolve in her eyes. They slipped out the back, using the stacked woodpile for cover, and worked their way toward the barn. A lantern flickered near its side. Boone himself, crouched low, match in hand. Colt raised the Winchester, but Boone was ready. The hired gun spun, firing first. The bullet tore a groove across Colt's shoulder, spinning him back. Elara surged forward, the Bowie knife flashing in the firelight. Boone swung at her with the lantern, but she ducked, driving the blade into the soft space beneath his ribs. The glass shattered, flames licking at the snow. Boone staggered back, eyes wide, the fight draining out of him in a steaming breath. One of his men shouted, charging forward, but Colt's shot dropped him before he could reach her. The last rider fled into the trees, the sound of his retreat swallowed by the wind. Elara stood over Boone, the knife still in her hand, chest heaving. She could have ended him then, but she stepped back, the decision deliberate. "Tell Amos Cole," she said, her voice low and cold. "I'm no one's property, and if he comes for me again, I won't stop at one." Boone's gaze flickered, half fear, half hatred. He pressed a hand to his wound and stumbled toward his horse. Within moments, he was gone, leaving only churned snow and the faint trail of blood. Colt leaned against the barn wall, breathing hard, his shoulders slick with blood. "You move like someone who's fought before," he said. She wiped the blade clean on the snow. "I've been fighting my whole life. Tonight just counted more." In the silence that followed, the cold pressed close, but something between them had shifted. Colt no longer saw her as a stranger under his roof. She was a force in her own right, as dangerous to her enemies as she was determined to survive. Neither of them said it, but they both knew. Amos Cole wouldn't let this go. The next time, he wouldn't send just Boone Mercer. He'd bring the kind of trouble that could burn more than a cabin to the ground. And when that happened, they'd face it together. The snow hadn't yet swallowed Boone Mercer's trail when Colt Harlow stepped back into the cabin. He didn't have to speak. Elara could read the weight in his shoulders, the knowledge that what had just happened was only a prelude. Boone would reach Amos Cole before nightfall, and Amos wasn't the kind of man to lick his wounds in private. Colt sank into the chair by the stove, his shirt darkened at the shoulder where Boone's bullet had grazed him. Elara moved silently, heating water, tearing an old linen into strips. She'd seen wounds like this before, on both sides of the line, and her hands worked with a steady competence. But when her fingers brushed the ragged edge of Colt's skin, he caught the shadow of something in her expression. Not fear, but anger, sharp and bright. "They won't come just for me next time," she said quietly. "They'll come for you too." Colt's gaze met hers. "That's been true since the moment I stepped off that boardwalk." For a while, the only sound was the hiss of the kettle and the crackle of the fire. Outside, the wind had gone still, a dangerous calm in a country where storms rolled in without warning. Elara knew enough about men like Amos to understand the pattern. When humiliation was public, the retribution was too. By mid-afternoon, the first sign came. A lone rider on the ridge, just a silhouette against the pale sky. He didn't move closer, didn't call out, just sat his horse and watched. Colt saw him from the barn door, his hand tightening on the stock of his rifle. When Elara joined him, he didn't take his eyes off the ridge. "Scout," he said, "they're marking the ground." The rider vanished after an hour, but the sense of being measured, of their lives being drawn into someone else's ledger, lingered. Elara found herself pacing the cabin, every creak of the boards sounding like a warning. By sundown, the unease had settled into something heavier, a certainty. It broke just after dark. The night erupted with the pounding of hooves, the low thud of boots hitting frozen ground. Colt had already doused the lantern, moving into position at the window. Elara crouched by the stove, the scattergun in her lap. Outside, voices barked orders, their echoes bouncing off the tree line. Then, Amos Cole stepped into the open. Even in the dim moonlight, he cut a figure meant to be seen. A long coat of black wool, gloves stitched fine, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing eyes that never moved without purpose. Behind him, 6 men fanned out in a loose semicircle, rifles slung but ready. "Evenin', Harlow," Amos called, his tone smooth, almost cordial. "I believe you've got something of mine." Colt leaned his shoulder against the frame, rifle barrel resting in the crook of his arm. "You'd be wrong about that." Amos smiled, a thin slash in the dark. "Half-breed girl like that doesn't have a place out here. She's trouble. You know it. I'm just trying to put things right." The words hit Elara like a strike to the ribs, but she stayed where she was, every muscle coiled. Colt didn't answer at first. He let the silence stretch until it was taut as a wire. "You're standing on my land," Colt said finally. "You've got until I count 3 to be off it." Amos's smile didn't falter. "Or what? You'll gun me down in front of my men? You think that'll end it?" Colt's voice didn't rise, but it carried. "Number, but it'll start something you won't walk away from." The standoff broke, not with a shout, but with the quiet shift of a man's hand toward his weapon. Elara saw it before Colt did. A shadow breaking from the flank, moving fast. She swung the scattergun up, the blast tearing through the night. The man went down hard, snow exploding around him. That single shot lit the fuse. Gunfire cracked from both sides, bullets shattering the cabin's front boards. Colt fired back in measured bursts, each shot finding its mark. Elara reloaded without thinking, moving from window to door and back again, her pulse steady in the chaos. Amos's men began to fall back after the 4th body dropped, dragging the wounded into the tree line. Amos himself stayed longer, firing twice before retreating, his parting words carried on the wind. "This isn't over, Harlow. Not by a long mile." When the last hoofbeat faded, the night closed in again, thick and suffocating. The cabin's air smelled of gunpowder and splintered pine. Colt set his rifle down, scanning the yard for movement, while Elara stood in the doorway, breath clouding in the cold. They had held their ground, but both knew the truth. Amos wouldn't be satisfied until one of them was in the ground. And for the first time, Elara wasn't thinking only about surviving. She was thinking about finishing this. In her mind, the choice had already been made. If Amos Cole wanted to take her apart piece by piece, she'd make damn sure he bled for every inch. This story's lesson is that dignity is not something anyone can give or take. It's something you claim and defend for yourself. Elara, cast aside by both worlds she belonged to, refused to be defined by prejudice or ownership. Colt, a man scarred by loss, chose to stand against injustice even when it meant danger to himself. Together, they proved that survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about fighting for the right to live on your own terms. True worth is measured by courage in the face of those who would diminish you, and by the alliances you build in that fight.